This is the Business Tech Playbook, your source for IT help for your business.
Welcome to the Business Tech Playbook. I'm your host, Rob Zolson.
And I'm William Pote, eTop Technology.
See, I can be professional too, BJ, in your face. All right, just because you have a nice blue polo doesn't mean I can't be nice too. No, just kidding. Welcome to the podcast.
You're assuming I have jeans on.
Guys, if you haven't heard this podcast before, this is the podcast where we try to take IT concepts and put them in normal layman's terms and get rid of the alphabet soup and teach generally a C-level person, a business executive, how to demystify IT terminology and generally the IT that your business runs on. So today, we'd like to go over a little bit of what we call Active Directory and what it is and why you need it.
You listen carefully, because this is the topic that you didn't know you needed to pay attention to. It sounds very special. Active Directory. Is that better than a passive directory?
I actually did a search, and someone in a forum says, "Can I get a passive aggressive directory, please?"
It's Microsoft, of course. That just comes by default. It starts with a passive aggressive.
And so the wordplay begins. Well, exactly. First and foremost, let's explain what Active Directory is, BJ. I'll have you take the floor.
Sure. So there's this concept that Microsoft released probably mid-90s, and effectively it's a server that holds the users of every single that are allowed to interact with and work inside your organization. It started out as a relatively simple thing and has gotten more complex, and it's been replaced by some other tools, at least partially. We still, and probably about half of our environments have Active Directory domain controllers, servers is what they're called. But effectively, it's a container that holds your user identities. So if you've ever gotten a username my name's William Pote. So for a lot of our clients, their username would be W Pote. And so the Active Directory is where administrators like us can manage people's usernames, people's passwords, emails, what kind of policies they're allowed to have, do they get access to these folders? So it's really the source of truth on anything when it comes to identity management.
So to go backwards a little bit, if you buy a computer from a normal retail store and you bring it home, you're working in, it's just that computer solo, and that's what we call it being in a work group. That computer isn't tied to anything. When you set it up, you put yourself its own local username, whatever you call it. Maybe you just call it HP, or you don't even care about a username because you don't want to look at it. So you type something in and you ask for a password, and then all you use is that password, and you only may have one login on that computer ever. That is only on that machine. Now let's pretend that we did that in a business where we had 50 computers. Someone messaged in saying, "I want to change my password." Well, if they don't know how, don't have the permissions to do so, that person has to physically either remote into that computer, or they have to go to that computer somehow to change the password on that machine and manage that local instance on that one computer. It becomes a management nightmare if you have each computer acting as their own island. So if you use
picture this, you hire this guy William, and he gets a computer set up for him, and then he changes the password on you and doesn't tell you what the password is, which he shouldn't, let's be honest. But realistically, if I leave, now you're having to figure out a way to hard reset that password that I set that you didn't know about, because there's no central way to manage it.
He's locked you out of your information.
It's kind of like when people sign up for personal, and this is just kind of a continued case in areas that we see regularly. So a lot of clients have Apple phones and devices. And so people sign up for a iCloud account under either their personal email or the company email. It's a little easier to break in if you have the company email. But if they sign up with their william@gmail.com, which isn't an actual email address, well, it probably is, but it's not mine. So feel free to send as much email there as you wish.
Poor William.
Sorry, poor William. But what we see a lot is then that phone is bricked, which is a non-technical term for unable to be used any longer, simply because it's attached to an email that you no longer have access to.
Apple thinks. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say Apple thinks that that account you set it up in is the owner of that, when actually the company is the one who bought it, owns it, and supposed to manage it.
And that is a big part of why centralized management and having the right tools is super important for companies. It feels like a waste of money sometimes. It maybe feels like a bit of a management and potential administrative nightmare. But the reality is some of the things that we can do to maximize our clients' lives are really tied to having some kind of identity management tool. So for our premise-based, which means people that have servers inside the building, clients that have domain controllers, that becomes our source of truth for all identity. So that flows into Microsoft, that flows into, do we deploy, like most people have like network drives or shared drives, like people go, I have the S drive or the L drive. It's just a folder on a server somewhere that has been shared to all of these computers. But if we don't have a policy like group that Active Directory server, we're not able to deploy those things automatically. And so now we have to either log into every single machine, or it's going to, my favorite is it breaks, and if there's a policy attached, it fixes it automatically. But if there's no policy, then it's just broken until somebody has a chance to fix it. So this works for printers, this works for files and folders, this works for, like, what are people allowed to do to their machines? Can people install their own software? It really just, there's a lot of control that you lose by not having that Active Directory or identity management.
So it's centralized management for logins. So if you have a computer that someone needs to log into, you're not just going to say, hey, here's the password for computer 12. You're going to say, here's your password for wpote, log in, and suddenly your profile's built with the stuff that you're supposed to have initially. At least access to the computer without being able to see the other people's content.
Exactly.
Then the magic of Active Directory, you said with group policy, as group policy can do a lot of different things. You mentioned the mapped drives is certainly one of them, but a lot of other convenient settings that you can do is if you're in a company and there's someone typed in their own profile, you can add things like printer setup and have shared printers in a network. I can't tell you how much time that I've done on certain businesses that they haven't shared out or had an Active Directory built, set up and maintained correctly, where I had to, each profile, install the printer for each person that logged in. Like, they'll have a shared computer, they'll have 8 different logins. That means I have to install that printer 8 different times in a lot of scenarios. Active Directory can make it so that when they log in, they already know that this person gets these printers delegated out and automatically shares those printers out to them without having to worry or maintain that. So there's a lot of background steps it takes care of. And, of course, you said security. We talked about in another podcast how important it is to onboard and offboard clients when, let's say, we have to fire William Pote because he's been naughty.
What?
Is
he going out to dinner without asking people? Okay.
All we got to do is contact our IT guy, and he has the tools to press a button and lock down that computer. Now that computer, they don't longer have access. They can't steal the company, information. They can't maliciously delete company files that are being protected. It's full control. There's so many. Those are just the basic things that we're covering with Active Directory and why you should be doing it. But they're definitely what we call the lowest hanging fruit that Active Directory offers.
Well, and then people might ask, what's next? I'm so glad you asked. So for our customers that are very cloud oriented, so those that have a lot of software as a service, SaaS applications, they don't have these fat applications that we've talked about, like QuickBooks or Sage or some kind of ERP software.
Now, he's not talking about calories. When we talk about a fat application, like a large installed program, like QuickBooks is not an easy thing just to install on the spot, We're
looking at you, Trump.
This
is a piece of software we've been fighting internally for
not the politician. No, it's
it's literally TRUMPF, Trump. When the support goes, every single install has its own unique problems. I'm just like, then fix the installer, but that's kind of beside the point.
Get it out, brother. Get it out. This is therapy.
I don't know if we have a long enough podcast to deal with the amount of anxiety and stress I've got over that application. But kind of what's next. So for our cloud-oriented clients, we've been moving them into something called Microsoft Entra. It's a really funny name. It used to be Azure Active Directory, but they're really trying to get people away from the thought of calling it Active Directory because it's so different in some ways than the traditional Active Directory. And so since it's their new cloud-only approach, you can, with a caveat, sync it to your local servers, which we do for all of our clients, which keeps passwords in sync, keeps single sign-on working. It makes the experience just a lot smoother. But for
if I may pause you here, actually,
Please.
we missed a step. So we talked about what
let's do
Active Directory does and what we do without Active Directory, not how Active Directory was set up. So Active Directory is essentially the phone book, the controller, that we have to set up on an actual server, generally physically on site. This requires a Windows server somewhere connecting to the network. It used to be where we had to keep it on site. Now we can actually spin up a server in a different location and network it properly off-site. These require licensing. Can give average costs. If you want to know more, you can reach out to us, podcast@etoptechnology.com. If you're not on any type of Active Directory and you want to know what this would cost to upgrade to you, because again, it's kind of a moving target, and we're going to talk about the Entra versions that make this easier. But again, this is set up on a server, and it would be something that would have to be maintained. If the Active Directory gets shut off, you have a time frame that you got to get it back on so people can recommunicate to Active Directory to be able to log in, or they'll get locked out. It's clunky, not that great. So that's how we used to do things, and now this Entra. Go ahead now that we give them a little perspective of where we were.
Oh, for sure. Lost all train of thought there. I apologize.
You were just so excited. That's all. It's got to give them the story before.
And then I'm remembering that I really should let you be the interviewer and ask me questions rather than just droning on for an hour, because everybody loves talking about identity management for an hour.
I don't want to kill the hype though.
Yeah, right. So ultimately, like Entra, Microsoft's literal joke and statement around the marketing is it rhymes with the Magenta. And I'm like, you made up a word for it to rhyme with. Like, there is no such thing as Magenta. There's Magenta, but like there's a lot of sarcastic IT folks that make a lot of fun of Microsoft and their naming conventions. Like I feel like there's an entire department that only gets paid if they rename things to a more confusing thing and then make up words that it can rhyme with.
It's okay. We're getting Entra tattoos later.
Yeah, I'm getting Entra.
Don't tell your wife.
Yeah.
Shh.
We'll find it.
She doesn't listen to this podcast. We're good.
Yeah, right. She doesn't listen to this podcast. It's okay. So Entra ultimately is the new cloud-oriented version of what Microsoft is doing here. There are some other, and let me back up just a step. So one thing I've said a couple of times is identity management, right? So that's what Active Directory is. That's what Entra is. There's others like Jump Cloud, Okta. There's probably 6 or 8, I'll say, reasonable ones out there. Google actually has something similar inside their Google's, MDM, Google Suite type of stuff. Rob is looking very proud here, but
we'll talk about that at the end. Don't worry.
Let's be perfectly honest. It's not something we're ever going to do, because at the end of the day, what makes these identity managers can be used for a lot of different things. They allow you to start tying lots of different tools together. And I think this is even more important for companies with a lot of these SaaS or software as a service web applications. Most of these applications have the ability to do SSO. What is SSO? It's single sign-on. And what that means is basically in the back end, you can connect tie some connectors together. It's not always simple. It's not always straightforward, but that you can tie connectors together. So that way, whenever somebody from your company, we'll call him William again, goes to log into your Monday.com app, that person is using their William at eToptechnology.com. That allows them to have the same passwords, the same usernames, and it's all tied behind like multi-factor. So you can enforce all these different things for all of these different cloud apps because you're managing their identity well. So Entra is really the next iteration of this and Microsoft's version of this identity and access management tooling. I know it sounds super exciting, and you might ask, why does this matter to me?
Oh, let me answer that one, just high level.
Please.
You try to explain single sign-on. So let's pretend that you're in a business, and you're used to having a password for everything. So you have, let's say, 8 applications that you use daily. You would have a password for QuickBooks. You would have a password for your computer. You would have a password to get into your email. You would have a password to get into your time clock app. You would have a password to get, and then you just keep going through each application. And that gives you literally what we call the book of passwords, where you begin to have password soup, and you probably just have either the same password you've typed in with all the different platforms with maybe just a couple different number iterations at the end, or some other form of bad password management. So we don't like that as IT people. We want to make it convenient for you while still making it secure. So what if we had all of it tie in with this cool Entra tool, where every time you log in, it says, hey, Entra, is that a cool login? Is that the actual password that we're sharing? And your time clock app, your supposedly QuickBooks in the future, your computer, all of these applications would go as a single sign-on and just look at Entra as the one source of truth for your login, keeping this not only more secure for us, but easier on the end user because they only have maybe 2 passwords. But most of the time, it's just that one they're using from Entra.
And when you terminate them, when you send the termination form to us and we disable them and sign out all sessions, the best part is there's not even a pass. The single sign-on doesn't even pass passwords. It's literally passing a token that says this person is authenticated. So you log into your computer in the morning, you log into your 365, or it's probably already authenticated to that computer. So it's storing that authentication token on your trusted platform module. So it's called a TPM chip. And that trust knows that computer is tied to you and your identity. And so it holds that little piece of authentication knowing, okay, now whenever that person tries to go to monday.com, in our case, maybe ConnectWise for all of our different tools.
They don't even have to sign in. It just
They don't even have to sign in. It just logs them in all the time.
Because you already signed into your computer, and that was enough to authenticate all the rest of the apps. Productivity.
I'm waving my hands wildly here, so it looks like I'm doing something, but you can't hear that. No, you're absolutely right. I'm gesturing wildly. You're right, exactly.
So we have this cool Entra tool that allows single sign-on, but again, it takes the abilities of Active Directory and puts it in the cloud where we don't have to pay for that server any longer. We don't have to maintain that server. We don't have to make sure that it's online or has to do scheduled maintenance or reboots. It's just simply part of our Office 365 subscription, or excuse me, now it's Microsoft 365 subscription. Thank you, Branding. And now we can have the device management, your app identity managements, all in one centralized location where it was all should have been in the first place.
Right. Well, and that's it. Like the goal is to make things simpler, right? And so a lot of how you make things simpler for users is by complexity on the back end. So there's a lot of things that get tied together. A lot of these things go a lot easier if we know about it ahead of time. And my personal favorite is we have a client that has the enterprise version of Asana, but they went ahead and signed up for it, gave everyone accounts, and then told us about it like 4 months later. And at that point, it's kind of too late. But if we'd been involved in the very beginning, we probably could have spent 2 hours working with them and set it up to anytime somebody gets added to the Asana group, they get added to Asana. And now they get, you can probably set up permissions inside of there. So you have Asana managers and Asana users. There's a lot of things that you can tie into this identity and access management that makes you a lot more secure. But typically we have to know these things ahead of time.
So back in, let's rewind the clock here. I think that was 2014, 2013. I worked for an ISP, and they have all different types of platforms because internet service providers, they like to buy other internet service providers. That is generally the business model, is you just keep buying all these mom and pop shops that started in 1950 as telephone companies, and you keep growing the company because you buy more and more territory. So they have all of these different companies trying to integrate into each other. And there was a team at this particular ISP, and they wanted to begin playing the single sign-on game. So we found that when we went and reached out to all these platforms, you use Asana as a perfect example, they had all of these different platforms that each type of team used that they all pay different licensing for. And when we started integrating them with single sign-on, we found out that, hey, some of them integrated with different teams immediately, and they could drop licensing platforms because they already paid for the tool over here. That was one. And the amount of time that they used signing in and trying to move data between each other was enough to actually pay for any of the development time, costs, or anything else, even right up front for the first few weeks of putting any of these applications into single sign-on. So you say it was 2 hours to connect to Asana. It really isn't even that bad if you catch it up front. After the fact, it can be very messy. Mm-hmm. So if you have a tool that you want to implement, that was a home run, is talk to your IT person first before implementing the tool and seeing if they can make it easier for your team to log in.
And recognize when they say no, sometimes that is the right answer, or help them walk through understanding the business case of it. So one of the biggest challenges IT folks have is we're reasonably good at technology. Hopefully, I mean, like that's why you're in technology, right?
It sure should be, yeah.
We're oftentimes not super great with people, and then even more often than that, most of the time we don't really understand the business use case for it. Like, what's it actually doing to help the company? We get told, hey, here's a shiny thing, go do the shiny thing. And it's like, and we just wander off and go do it versus like thinking through the why a little bit more. And so, like, the why behind this identity access management is it allows a centralized source of truth for who somebody is. Honestly, it's even going to be even cooler. So there's something, this is a total tangent and I apologize, but it's all loosely related. So something Microsoft is working on is this, it's called a managed ID. And so basically what happens is, let's say we have a client, let's say we hired somebody and we have this set up. What happens is we text them a link from Microsoft. Microsoft says, go ahead and install your Authenticator app. It downloads it and it says, scan your ID. They take a picture of their ID. It then gets verified with the local like state verification authority for their driver's license or ID or whatever. And then it sets up all of their accounts without ever having to send them a password. Like literally they can go straight into whatever computer they have with number matching.
I can just see it now. I got robbed on the highway. My state issue ID is gone. I can't get into my accounts. There's ways around it, but you better have your ID.
It's not without, right. I'm not saying it's not without some potential challenges, and I think that's the biggest reason it hasn't taken off fully yet, is they're still trying to figure out all of the challenges. But like, think about that from a place where you're onboarding a ton of people. You now can just have Microsoft text download this app, scan your ID, and then it finishes setting up the account for them right there. And then you ship them a computer, they log in with, they type in William at etoptechnology.com, and their phone goes, boop, enter the number. So their computer displays 65, they type it on their phone, and it lets them in for the first time. And they literally never even had a password. Like, we're slowly but surely moving our cloud-only clients to fully passwordless. Like, at some point, like, I don't think I've logged into my computer with a password since I set it up the first time.
Wow.
And so
you got the PIN number, you have a Face ID, you got fingerprint. I mean, you got a RFID tap card. There's so many different ways. There's the YubiKeys where you can plug in a USB stick to your computer. There's so many different ways to do it, and having all that, having keys behind it. So one source of truth, you can press a button and then lock them out of all of the 8 accounts or 37 accounts you have is golden to have keys to the kingdom for each one of your users.
The owner of one of my clients called and was like, the general manager just quit. I need you to lock her out of her accounts now. And so since they're a fully cloud account, I went invalidate sessions, forward email, block. This was done in like under 3 minutes. And that person went from having full access to everything to zero access to anything. Like, this is why we do that. You manage that identity and you make sure that it all works together. And it really saves you just oodles of time and a lot of headaches down the road.
For sure. Now, while we're listening, I know we're going to have questions follow up on this, but the other conveniences of just having Active Directory or Entra from a C-level standpoint, what would it do for an end user besides, say, we've spoken to them about configuring a printer, mapping a network drive? What's a couple other easy ones that we could describe to them besides just access management?
So one of the core things we use Intune for is policy deployment. So mapping things down to your machine, similar to the map drives, which we typically don't do with Entra because there's no server to map. But they might be mapping down a SharePoint.
You said a new word. What's Intune?
Good point. Thank you.
Now you done did it.
I did it. The easier name for it is Microsoft Endpoint Management, basically. We've known it as Intune. It's still labeled Intune in a lot of places. It doesn't really mean anything other than it's kind of like the policy application side of the identity management. So on a Active Directory server, you have the Active Directory, which holds all of your users and folders and like security groups. And then you have group policy, which that group policy tool on the server deployed out mapped drives, software, settings, bookmarks, like all of that stuff. On Microsoft 365.
There's a great one. Software, bookmarks can all be handled through this. And then, again, the names. So we have GPO. You'll hear a part of the alphabet soup. So the group policy, what it can actually deploy to the computer, and Active Directory, the management of the actual users and credentials. So now that we have it moving over, Entra is the replacement for Active Directory. Intune, essentially high-level replacement for group policy.
Correct. Typically, the way we use one of the challenges we face with Intune is it operates very heavily in what we call jokingly, and actually ask any IT person, the Microsoft Minute.
It should be a tag term by now. It really should.
It's on our university site, Robbie. Like, if you ever need to explain why it's taking so long, just send them a link to our Microsoft Minute guide.
May I?
Please.
So
go for it. Jamie already used it with somebody.
I'll have one of my users. They'll message in to us because, again, we're IT support for other companies. They'll say, hey, I want you to give so-and-so calendar access to be able to edit so-and-so's calendar. So I'll log in. I'll say, hey, Microsoft, please make this happen. And I'll use tools to make this happen. And then hit deploy, right? That setting's saved. It's supposed to be live. But I still have to tell the customer, please allow up to 60 minutes for this to take full effect. Now, the Microsoft Minute is this mysterious time frame between when I said, please make it happen, and when the customer sees that it happened. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 55 minutes. We don't know. But generally, if it lasts longer than 60 minutes, something broke and it didn't happen.
Well, I mean, I've had settings. So you have to remember, like, all of these settings are replicating through all of Microsoft data centers everywhere in the world. So when you consider that it takes anywhere from like instantly to a day. So for example, one of the things we've used Intune, the group, like the policy management side of 365, it can take like up to a day to deploy out like OneDrive links or SharePoint sites to people's computers. And that's basically the equivalent of a mapped drive, which locally is completely instant. So we've started using Intune as the connector. So like the people log in with their Entra credentials that forces autopilot, which is another Microsoft term. But basically it takes that machine through what they call the out-of-box experience. So if you've ever set up a new computer, you go next, account, join it to the Wi-Fi, that kind of thing.
It's that lovely little wizard at the front when you first open a computer for the first time.
Autopilot basically intercepts it and then joins it to the company's Entra account. And then it lets Intune come in and finish the policies. What we do, and you can do a lot more with Intune than we individually do, but we found a better and faster way to make it work. So we use a tool called ImiBot. IT folks like having weird named tools. We know, we're sorry. It's because we spell everything wrong. Leet, Haxer kind of thing. But basically we use Intune to deploy ImiBot, and that typically happens in 10 minutes or less. And then we let ImiBot do the rest of the deployment for like all of their software applications, because the logging inside of ImiBot and the speed of deployment is at such a pace that it's, a computer could be completely set up in 20 to 30 minutes.
There's
maybe
no
up
longer
to an hour
that Microsoft Minutes plural that we have to deal with and wait a day for most stuff to show up. It's
basically instant application of policy. And so like
boom.
We even have to work around Microsoft's tools and find out like what's the best combination of making this work. So
but still,
we use it for the areas that makes the most sense.
To answer the question again of what Active Directory / Entra and the other tools like Intune can do for you, more of the not automated setup, but at least company used assets and policies. So if there's an application that you want, it can certainly check and auto deploy that. There's certain settings, bookmarks that you have to have. Like for instance, everybody needs access to this particular site, Monday.com. You can make sure that it's on everybody's browsers and deploy certain login credentials to each browser. There's a lot of controls that we can have and pre-set up. And it just gives that granular control that if something's going to be somewhat of a repeatable process to everybody's profile, you can deploy it from there.
Exactly. Well, and so this is really just all of these different tools. They sound complicated. People, and oftentimes in the backside, they can be somewhat complicated. But ultimately, their goal of all of these tools is to bring a lot of, ideally, simplification. Because then we can start making things the exact same for everyone. We can, there's so much we can do around just tying everything together. Like that's what makes IT magical, is by being involved in the entire process, having enough time and energy to tie things together, and it helps prevent the need to fight fires. Having these tools set up this way, you know what makes it magical, Robbie?
I'm listening.
You're listening? Okay, all right.
I'm excited now.
So
You don't use the word magical.
I don't. I know
I'm right here, baby.
it's magical fairy dust. So what makes it kind of magical is that now we stop having to worry about endpoints. Like the computer doesn't matter anymore. If somebody's having a problem with their computer, you give them a new one, they log in, and all their stuff is there. If they're having a problem with it, we just factory reset it at 5 o'clock when they're done, and they come back the next morning and it's all done. Or they log in and about 20 minutes later it's all finished. Obviously, this is a little bit dependent on how many applications they have, that kind of thing. But it starts making the laptop, the computer, whatever that people are working from, relatively irrelevant. Like, you need to make sure it stays up to date. You need to make sure you have enough power. But it makes the change process so much less painful because everything is, high 90% the exact same as when they left it. One of the best use cases we had was somebody's laptop literally got run over. They didn't tell us this for like 2 days, but we saw this old asset come back online and start working, and we were like, that's weird. And they were like, oh yeah, this laptop got run over. We need to replace it. Can you send us a quote? I'm like, what are you working on? Well, I pulled an old computer out of the back and logged into it, and everything's there. And we're just like, this is amazing. Like, we didn't even know that this was working, and it was working. Talk about making life easier for them. Like, she was able to pick up and keep working without having to even reach out to IT. And can you do that without IT? Probably not. But like, it felt magical to the user that it just all worked. And it felt pretty magical to us, and this is what we do.
We had one of our customers that we onboarded, and I'll never forget, they described it once the light bulb went off and they had that opportunity where they could just try another computer, and suddenly they logged in a little after the stuff deployed. It just looked like the other machine. They literally told me, like, so let me get this straight. Are you telling me I can be ambidextrous between computers? And I'm like, it took me a minute to figure that out. I'm like, ambidextrous mean I can use my left or my right hand? I'm like, I guess that's a decent description for it. But yeah, you can log into any company computer and your stuff will be there. And their mind exploded. They were just this is the best day ever.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges we've had with Active Directory is there's not really a good way to do that, because if you did, you were doing something called redirected profiles, which was an abysmal failure in most cases. It worked okay if you had a fast enough server and you had fast enough local machines and it was all on a local network. But it fell apart the second you started putting people on laptops and people took them home. With this, with the Entra, Intune, like OneDrive, like sync setup that we have going, like, it doesn't matter. Like, take the laptop with you, switch laptops, like, log you into a Windows 365 virtual computer. Like, it doesn't matter. You log in with the same credentials anywhere, and it's going to look almost exactly the same after about 30 minutes.
Now, we got to talk about what this is, why you should be using it, and then give you a little touch of what we do without it, essentially like your computer you use at home. Now, we didn't talk about a couple things that you shouldn't be using it for. And you shouldn't be using it in Use Active Directory for shared accounts. I continually see people put up generic users, like they put front desk, and then they have 3 people share the same login. That kind of defeats the purpose of the controls that you're paying for. If you want to lock it down, you're suddenly locking out a group of users out of a group of computers, all using the same login. If you need to audit something to see who did something, not to say like who did something wrong, but just to find out where something went, and you're trying to look up like an audit log, and you see that front desk did it, oh, that could be Kathy, Karen, John, or Jim. Again, you're not using your tools. And I've had a continual issue where one person changes a password, it changes it for everybody, and they can no longer use the most important step is multi-factor authentication. If someone has that app on their phone, or the key, or the methods that we talked about, and someone needs to log in and it prompts the one phone that has it, they have to suddenly message and ask, hey, can you tell me what code popped up on the phone so I could log in? These accounts are intended for one user and one user purpose, and never to share those multi-factor authentication accounts. So when you try to do this as a shared account, the whole process fails, and you're bypassing the entire reason why you're using this identity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so there are shared things that you should have, like a shared mailbox, like accounting. It's one thing to have a front desk at the company. But it's a completely different story to have people actually using that to log into the computer. I do highly recommend against shared accounts simply because now if you get a virus or something happens, you can't track where it came from. It's just front desk. Well, great. Was it William? Was it Robbie? Was it Brandon? Was it, Bob, Jane, Taylor? It doesn't matter. It just came from that generic front desk. And it could have been, you wrote it could have been something, if you wrote a password on it, it could be your UPS guy or girl. It's just, things like that.
So if you have a business case where you say, hey, it doesn't make sense to have this person fully logged in. All I need them to access is one app and to do one thing ever. That's all this person does. Then, number one, they still, in my opinion, should have a login. So really have the business case about still having a login, but still talk to your IT professional about the business case of a kiosk mode. If that's how it's going to work, there's no reason you need to give a full identity to a computer, when instead you can change that computer into all it does is give that one thing out appropriately and nothing else.
Well, and actually that's a great point. Like, we use kiosk mode for like frontline users. So like, let's say they need to be a cashier or something at one of our clients is a motorcycle dealer. So let's say one of their front desk people, they need to be able to run like 3 applications: their dealer management system, their credit card application, and the browser so they can get access to their email. Like, they're not using Office, they're not using any of these tools. Like, honestly, it's a really good use case for a kiosk mode where we literally just say these 3 applications launch every single time. And then every time that computer logs out or restarts, it basically clears all the cookies and cache, as it were. If Bob goes and uses that computer, logs in, checks their email and stuff, like, a lot of the identity management's happening on the
email login page.
Side, at the email login page, exactly. And so the computer doesn't matter, but then they also can't do anything to the computer. So, they're not going to go play solitaire on it because they can't.
Yeah, it's not that we as IT people want to stop you from doing what you're doing. It's that we have tools to do it in the correct manner, to do it in the secure manner that it was intended to be done. So if you want to tell us a business case and we're like, hey, we have this easier solution that'll work a lot better, talk to them about kiosk mode if they didn't have the light bulb go off already in that conversation.
Exactly. But with all that being said, any other things you can think of that we should cover there, Robbie?
I'm trying to think of any other bad practices. Oh, nothing. If you haven't done Active Directory or Entra or any type of directory for your employees, pretend that you're going to grow. If you're listening to this and you're a small business, a lot of times we see this commonly where they just say everybody puts everybody in the system as a first name. You're going to grow if you're doing this right. It's just a matter of when. So put, first initial, last name, and really plan to have a database that is going to have 3 Johns at your company. As an IT guy, please don't do this to us, that you have John 1, 2, and 3, and we have to figure out which one was which.
Leave the 4 Johns and 3 Peters and 4 Mikes at the tile company alone, man.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
It works as long as there's JOHN, JON.
I don't care. It has every company,
Right.
I've seen a company with 12 total people, and they still had, 3 people with the same name. So I'm like, plan around it. Okay,
really?
My mother is named Rhonda. I don't consider that super common of a first name, but she still has the first and matching last name, so they had to put a middle initial and all kinds of craziness. But
right.
Still plan around that you're even though it's maybe 5 people in an office, plan that you're going to grow, and make sure to build your usernames appropriately at the first step. So I think those are the 3 low-hanging fruit at the top of my head I can think of for those dabbling in Active Directory or Entra.
Exactly. Well, it's been a good conversation. Next time you come to town, we were talking about Peru before we got on. If anyone comes to Redlands and wants to go get Peruvian food, let me know. I'd be happy to go and grab some lunch.
Now, what is a Peruvian staple specifically before we go? I'm kind of I need to know.
Oh, man. Corn is one of them. Trying to remember. It's been a while since I've been there. It makes me want to go get some now. This place is called Red Panka here in Redlands.
Shout out.
Shout out, right? Exactly.
He's been hangry this entire podcast.
Yeah, I actually ate before I got here.
Oh.
So they have a lot of it is very kind of Latin American flavor anyway, like saltado, chicharron, quinoa. I mean, quinoa is more.
I recognize
South.
one word out of all of that.
Exactly.
I'm excited.
Well, right. It's so good. We'll bring you a gallon of milk and some mayonnaise, Robbie, so that way you don't die.
The mayonnaise is just for the skin, so I don't suntan.
Oh, right. Wow. They had these red panko fries. I'm trying to remember what they were. All I know is that they were good. There we go. I'm going to find their website. Sorry, I'm running really slow right now.
No worries.
Needless to say, it's good. If you come to town, hit me up and we'll go get Peruvian food.
Peruvian food indeed. Well, if you have more questions, again, podcast at etoptechnology.com. If you got more questions for us, we'd happily chit-chat with you. And we'll see you in the next podcast, guys.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Talk to you soon.